Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and a special welcome to Andy Gager. Uh, Andy is, if you don't mind, there we go, Andy. Andy is a frequent industry speaker, but he's a professional consultant and training facilitator with 20 years experience optimizing operations and really driving strategic success. I cannot speak highly enough of Andy. He is an expert in process improvement, lean methodology, and performance gap analysis to enhance efficiency. He also specializes in leadership development, change management, and organizational excellence. And I know you all are going to learn a tremendous amount from Andy today. And Andy, welcome.
Thank you, David. It's good to be here. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate everybody joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. And as David alluded to, my wish and hope is that you do take a couple of nuggets of wisdom from this session. So um, we will have time at the end here for any questions that you have, and either myself or David will be more than happy to answer those. So if you do have some questions, you can hold those to the end, and we will address those as they come in. So let's just jump right into it. I put this slide in here because in a lot of my training sessions, and I do quite a few different training sessions, leadership and supervision being one of them, and several other training sessions. And I put this in here because a lot of times this is how people feel. It's very easy for us to point fingers uh, at everybody except ourselves. So it's like, here we go. We have two deers. For those old enough to remember, Gary Larson had a comic strip for years and years. This was one of him, or one of his rather, and I particularly liked it, um, so I use it. So it, obviously, two deers in the woods, the birthmark with an arrow on it, or a bullseye rather. But as the deer says, bum of a birthmark, dude. Okay, because that's a lot of times that's how we feel, is we walk around with a bullseye right on our chest. So today, what we'd like to talk about is the inefficiencies that every organization has, and I'm going to show you a slide coming up here soon, because in my experience, traveling around the world and working with organizations globally, I see the same things over and over again. Okay, and what I mean by that is some of the basics. We may think we're doing things well, okay, but even the best of the best, all right, or even the world-class organizations um, have opportunity. Some folks believe 10 to 15% opportunity for improvement. So that's some of the things that we're going to talk about during this session. Okay, but one of the things I am going to talk about here is we have conflict that is pretty much built in every organization, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But this is what I see. Okay, and by the way, this is also comes from my personal experience. So maybe you can relate to this. It's the end of the month. It's on Friday. We have a piece of a critical equipment, or we have an asset that's critical to our organization, and it goes down. And I was a plant manager for a number of years, and this never ceases to amaze me how often this happened. Right, Friday afternoon. Thank goodness emergencies only happen Monday through Friday between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Right, but the reality is emergencies happen 160 hours, or have the opportunity to hit us, you know, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But in this example right here, we're running behind schedule. We have a very important customer. I tell the maintenance crew, get out there, stick your finger in that proverbial dike, right? Use the duct tape, get the baling wire, just get me through this run. Okay. Then what I'll do is I'll just bring everybody in on Saturday at overtime, time and a half, premium dollars, whatever your term is. Okay. And we have somebody in my procurement department contact our supplier, order the part, please overnight that part to us. Okay. We go in on Saturday. Okay. The FedEx or the UPS or the DHL vehicle backs up to the dock. Um, we open up the back of that truck, and the part that we ordered that we had overnight is not on the truck. And the reason why is because when we placed the order, we forgot to tell them to mark that Saturday delivery. So to them, overnight means, Monday. Okay. So now here I am. I'm paying a couple mechanics, one electrician, time and a half. And our company policy was we had to pay you a minimum of 4 hours. Okay. So now I'm paying 12 hours at premium dollars because we never got the part. So now that repair can't be done until Monday, which now is going to shut down my production schedule on that following Monday until we can get that part delivered, and then we'll get in there and do that repair. But what I'm telling my maintenance crew is, look, you make it work any way possible. You get that piece of equipment operational until we can do a proper repair. And in my experience, again, a lot of temporary repairs turn out to be permanent repairs. So the term I use there is, look, are we working on our equipment or are we actually fixing our equipment? Because there is a difference. And too many organizations are actually working on their equipment rather than actually taking the time to fix it. And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about. So this slide right here, this is what I showed this slide as well. And this goes back to what I just said a second ago is most organizations in the world are set up for conflict. And each of us work in our own, what I refer to as functional cylinders. Okay, so my functional cylinder in this example, I have operations. In the middle, I may have supply chain. Right on the right functional cylinder there are the silos. Okay, is my maintenance department. Now you could change any one of these silos or vertical cylinders, right, to whatever you want. But what happens is, and again, this was my reality when I was in private industry. My behavior was being driven by my key performance indicator or my metric, right? Or my measure, whatever term you want to use. And the reality was, as long as my house was clean, as long as my KPIs were trending in the right direction, no offense, but I really didn't care about yours. Okay, as long as my house was clean, as long as my metrics, I'm hitting my targets, I'm hitting my numbers, okay? I'm good, right? So in this example right here I use is, operations, one of their key performance indicators might be produce, produce, produce. Okay. Um, you don't shut that equipment down for anything, right? Because we're in the business to make money. Now, if I look, and so therefore, they want one of everything maybe in your parts warehouse. Better yet, build me a whole nother assembly line, or build me a whole nother department, or build me, better yet, a whole nother facility next door. Because when this line or when this equipment goes down, I'll just flex my labor over to that other equipment. Maintenance, you do, whatever voodoo magic you do to get this equipment back up and running, right? But I'm not going to miss a beat because my key performance indicator is produce, produce, produce. Then on my maintenance functional cylinder, one of their key performance indicators might be reliability or availability. Okay, so they too want one of everything in the warehouse, okay, or the storeroom. Okay. Either one of those scenarios is not reasonable or feasible. We can't. It's impossible. Okay. But they're being driven by their KPIs. And if I go in the middle with my supply chain, they're being driven by certain KPIs as well. And one of their key performance indicators might be to reduce cost, right? Particularly if we're talking multi-divisions and we have a corporate procurement department that is purchasing for all those different divisions. Because again, they have their key performance indicators. They're trying to reduce their cost. So I have a person in procurement whose behavior is being driven by their metric. So therefore, they're going to go to China and go buy bamboo bearings, right? They're cheap. My KPI says reduce cost. I bought cheap stuff, so I'm hitting my numbers. But what's the impact to my production and my maintenance department, right? So, we may have to look at total cost of ownership. We may have to upgrade our procurement department to have professional buyers who understand life cycle costing, right? And we may actually have to go out there and purchase some more expensive precision bearing, like an SKF or a FAG or a Timken or something, okay? Because the availability and the reliability of that equipment will increase, therefore we can, in theory, produce more. So because we're being driven by these different KPIs, somehow we need to break those vertical KPIs down to more horizontal, where we're in this thing together. So we're trying to work together. So if the equipment goes down, hey, brother, come on over here and help me out. Let's get this thing back up and running, right? So again, every organization, I'm not going to say every, a large percentage, let's put it that way, a large percentage of organizations are structured to be in conflict. That's a challenge. That's a real challenge. This is another slide that I have in just about every, well, it is in every one of my training packages. Okay. Now you could debate with me my percentage or my ratios here. Okay. But I bet I'm pretty close. Okay. 20, 40, 30, and 10. Okay. Let's keep the math simple here. Let's just say we have 10 individuals working in the department. I'm willing to bet that 2 of them are superstars. Okay. They're very, very good at what they do. Matter of fact, they could probably be in your position as a manager or supervisor. Okay. I mean, they're so good. I mean, I'm talking about on the maintenance side of the business. They're so good. They could take they could take a potato, a rubber band, and a paper clip, and by gosh, they can make a 16 gauge shotgun out of the thing, right? They're that good. Now, I'm going to come back to that group. Okay. So move on to the 40 percenters or the next 4 people in the department. Very good at what they do. They're rock solid. They come in, they do a quality job, but at the end of the day, they have a life outside of the company. I love them. I call them the soldiers. Okay. I would love to have a whole staff of them. Okay. Um, then I have the next 3 people maybe. Okay. Or the next 30 percenters. Okay. They may be new to the organization. They may be new to the department or new to their role. Okay, but I call them the rookies. They have opportunity to improve. Okay, I like that group, and I'll come back to that group again in a second. And then every organization has a 10 percenter. Right, I call them the bottom feeders. Those individuals, every fiber in their body is negative. Okay, no matter what we do, in their mind, they are the superstars. In their mind, they are the 20 percenters. They are the only ones in their mind that do any work here. Okay. I don't know what everybody else does, but I'm the only one that does any work around here. Okay. But I'm not appreciated. And a lot of times, those 10 percenters are negative influencers. And the reality is, as managers and supervisors, we wind up spending 80 to 90% of our time. And by the way, I was guilty of this. Okay. We spend 80 to 90% of our time working with that group, with the hopes that we can elevate them up to the 40%. All right. Very doubtful they'll ever get up to the 20 percenters, right? But the reality is, if they're a 10 percenter, we're going to deal with that group differently. Okay. The area that I want my supervisors and managers to focus on is the 30 percenters, right? To work with them, to coach them, right? To help them elevate, uh, to the upper tier, the 40 percenters or even the 20 percenters. Now, let me go back to the 20 percenters. When I facilitate the training, I ask the question, are the 20 percenters more comfortable in reactive work or in proactive work. And what I respond is to say their comfort zone tends to be more in the firefighting zone because when we are responsible for the equipment, who are we going to call? Okay. And please, nobody say Ghostbusters. We're going to call the best that we got. We're going to call the best person we have available to do that work. So that person is going to swoop in. They're going to get the equipment repaired. They're going to get it back up and running. And as managers and supervisors, we pat them on the back and we say, great job. So we're rewarding the wrong behaviors. We should really be rewarding those individuals that capture failures before they become failures, because it is so much more expensive to the organization when our philosophy on our money-making equipment is run to failure. And so that's where we're gonna go right now. Okay, because we are in the business, I'm assuming this, to make money. So in the manufacturing world, we have this thing called cost of goods sold. That's the conversion cost. That's the raw materials, the labor, right, the equipment, all that. That's all the contribution cost to to manufacture a part or conversion or whatever that is. Okay. Then we sell it on the open market. Okay. The difference between those two is called margin. So anything that we can do to lower the cost of goods sold or contribution cost, in theory, our margin should improve. And again, that's where we're heading right now. So how do we do that? How do we lower those costs? Okay. Here, this slide right here, I want you to look at this slide and think money. Okay. And I'm going to explain this slide towards the end of the session. The average maintenance operation experiences 1/3 of waste in their budget every year. That goes back to what I just said. Are we working on the equipment or are we fixing the equipment? Okay. Um, we always seem to have time to do it over again. We always seem to have time to do it again and again and again and again. That's working on the equipment. But we need to understand, how do we break that cycle and actually repair and fix the equipment? 18% of 18% of a typical technician's day, okay, whatever industry you're in, oil and gas, manufacturing, uh, facilities, pharmaceutical, power gen, 18% of a typical technician's day is looking for tools or parts. So they're walking around. And if you believe this or not, I don't believe I've ever gone to a facility anywhere in the world that didn't have secret stashes of materials somewhere around the facility. And I get it. I understand that. Okay. And one reason why is because perhaps they've lost confidence that the warehouse will actually have the part. So in self-perseverance, they're going to have their secret stashes of parts. Okay. Now that's a whole different session right there when we talk about materials management and all that stuff. Okay. But we have 24 to 26% of a typical technician's day is walking to and from the job site, particularly in the facilities world when we have a large campus. If we're looking at a quarter of their day, okay, walking to and from the job site, they go to the parts room or the store room to go get a couple parts, go back, right? Or first of all, they visit the site, diagnose the issue, go to the warehouse, grab some parts, go back to the equipment, start doing some work and figure out they don't have the right tool or they're missing some parts, so they go back and forth, okay? So if you just add just those two bullets, you're looking at almost 50% of their day not doing what we're paying them to do. And now there's a cost associated with that. That's the inefficiencies, okay? And I'm going to show you a spreadsheet in just a little bit that's going to show you how how impactful that is, okay? The average utilization, believe it or not, the average utilization around the world for a technician, again, no matter what industry we're talking about, is between 17 and 24%. That's terrible. And it's not to say that we have terrible maintenance technicians. What I am saying, though, is the system that allows that to occur is what's broken, and we need to fix that. Reactive maintenance, 3 to 4 times more expensive if we are in a run to failure culture. 74% equipment failures are caused by that operation of that equipment or the inadequacy of operation of that equipment. I've seen that over and over and over, right? In a lot of cultures that I've worked in, the operations, the operators, they believe breakdown means break time. Okay. So 74%. But I'm going to flip side of that, 63% of maintenance activities are self-induced. That correlates to that very first bullet there, right? We have time, we call that maintenance-induced maintenance. We don't have time to do it right the first time, but we always seem to have time to do it over and over and over again. 58%, this now I'm looking at the materials management side, our materials availability. 58% of the materials in a typical warehouse we haven't touched in over 3 years. Now, I'm not saying though that is obsolete materials. What I am saying is we have a room full or a warehouse full of materials that we haven't touched in over 3 years. Some of that is obsolete, yes. Some of those are critical spares. Some of those have long lead times. Some of those, the supplier is no longer in business. Some of those items are obsolete from our suppliers. Okay. But 58% on average is filled with materials that we haven't used. Of the remaining 42% of what is considered active inventory, we've issued out at least once a year, 60% of that is overstocked. So, what's the easiest thing to do with our min-max levels, when we run out, is to raise those min levels. So over 60% of that inventory is overstocked. And then one of the biggest ones, and out of all these things, of all these bullets, this is the one I'm most concerned about. Okay. Less than 30% of global organizations believe that their asset hierarchy is actually correct. That's where we're going to go with this now is if you ask me what every organization in the world must have, I am going to tell you, you must have an accurate asset registry, an asset hierarchy, and then that drills down into your equipment bill of materials. And actually, David, I think we'll be talking about that in a minute. All right. I have a case study very quickly here. This is the most powerful slide that I ever created by accident. I'm sorry, graph. This is the most powerful graph that I've ever created in my life, and it was by complete accident. I was visiting a site. If you see the dates, this goes way back to the early 2000s. All right. I visited a site. I was talking to one of the maintenance folks there, and I asked them about their preventive maintenance program. And his response was, I remember when we used to do PMs. I said, okay, are you tracking that? And he said, yes, that's one of our KPIs. And he gave me the data. That's the dark blue line you see. And as soon as I saw that and I graphed it, I went down to the operations department and I asked them, are you tracking unscheduled downtime? And they said, yes, that's one of our KPIs. That's the pink line. 2 significant events, those are the vertical lines you see there. 2 significant events occurred during this time. Okay. The first one happened in mid-year of 2003. That major event was a change in leadership. The previous plant leader, the plant manager, believed that they had to take care of their money-making machines. So thou shalt do your preventive maintenance program. And that was reflected in their unscheduled downtime or break-in work, whatever term you want to use. That person was moved to a different division. They brought in another individual as the plant manager, and their philosophy was you don't shut that equipment down for anything. You run those horses. And that's reflected. You see what happened here. Their PM compliance went through the floor, and their break-in work or emergency work went through the roof. That happened over the course of 3 years. Then that individual, which I'll come back to in a minute, that individual was replaced, and not for the reasons you think, by the way. That individual was replaced, and a young engineer was brought in as the new plant manager. And I can tell you, when I was at corporate headquarters, his termination papers were on the president's desk. And the reason why was because they were missing deliveries to their customers. Their maintenance costs were out of this world. Okay, their overnight or expedited freight deliveries, FedEx overnight, again, proportionally way out of line. Okay, and it wasn't until I showed this graph to the president of the company and showed him the real story of what was happening, because this poor engineer inherited a bunch of dogs. He inherited a bunch of unreliable equipment that was breaking down constantly. They couldn't meet the quality standards. They weren't meeting their customer delivery dates. Okay. So I'm going to show you what happened after we figured all this out, right? That's the end of the case study. What happened to the individual in the middle here, this is rather ironic. Corporate interpreted the production numbers coming out of this plant as incredible. They've never saw numbers like that coming out of the plant previously. So they then interpreted that as this individual must be an absolute superstar. So instead of terminating this individual, they wound up promoting that individual to be the vice president of operations for all 5 divisions. I don't know whatever happened to him. Okay, but that's what happened. Okay. So we got in there. Okay, we got in there and we figured this out. So this is what happened. This is the corrective actions that we took. We immediately resumed the PM. We did a PM optimization workshop. Are we doing the right PMs? Each task in the PM, is that addressing a failure mode or failure modes? If it's not, what's the value in us doing it? So we conducted a PM optimization. We immediately resumed the PM. We did an equipment walk down because whether you know it or not, okay, there's a huge difference between design and install. And again, David will talk about that, I think, in just a couple of minutes, okay? But we got out of the offices and we actually walked down the equipment to figure out what do we have. That's the asset registry. Okay, now what's the hierarchy of that equipment? We also conducted some cross-functional failure modes and effects analysis. How are failures manifesting themselves on our most critical equipment? And what strategy are we going to put in place to address those potential failures? Do we stay with time-based strategies? Or is the consequence of the failure too great that we're now going to start moving away and we're going to move more towards condition-based or predictive PDM? Or, with that said, the consequence of the failure is minimal, so we're just going to run that to failure. Okay, so our strategies are all based on the consequence of the failures. The output from those events that we did or workshops that we conducted, we eliminated 33% of the current PM tasks that were adding zero value. We added another 20% PM tasks to actually address failure modes. Then what we did was we looked at, right, 24 to 26% of a technician's day is walking to and from the job site. So what's allowing that to happen? So we looked at their processes and we leaned that out. And then finally, after we did an equipment walk down, we validated our CMMS system, computer maintenance management system, to validate the asset hierarchy and the plant layout. Okay, now we're starting to get our arms wrapped around exactly what do we have. And what we do have, how are we going to maintain these money-making equipment or this money-making equipment? This was the results. Management had full support. There was a 13% increase on this thing called OEE, which is overall equipment effectiveness, which resulted in an $11.2 million revenue improvement. The reliability, I'm not going to read through all these. Reliability improved. Morale, that was a big one. That was a big one. Overall, the morale improved significantly. Okay. But they also engaged with their customers to work through quality and delivery. So they had to regroup. They had to get the trust of their customers back. So they brought them in to show the customers what are we doing to win your confidence back. All right. Now, I believe David has a couple things to pipe in on to just reinforce what we just talked about. David?
Yeah, and thanks, Andy, for sharing everything that you have. And I'm going to back up everything that you said virtually with data that we've seen in the field. I've had hundreds and hundreds of phone calls and meetings with people, and you're spot on. In the field, they don't know what they don't know. And the hierarchy of what's out there is a mess in many cases. And it's not every organization, but a vast majority of those organizations have this. It's 20 to 40% of their assets that are in the field have been replaced. They were swapped out during a construction project, never updated into that CMMS database, or they were decommissioned. And they're still out there. They're unaccounted for. They're out there. They're on that roof. They plugged them, but they're still there. Okay. Now, whether or not they're functioning or not, may look like that photo in the upper left. I don't know. But again, it's decommissioned and it's still unaccounted for, or they've moved. I was at a hospital just last week and they've repurposed some of their split systems. They're in the building. They don't know where they are, but they've been repurposed and relocated elsewhere. But again, it comes down to that they're not accounted for, or they're just flat out new. And they were never updated into the database. They had a project that came up. They renovated a floor. All of those new units were installed. And before they even closed up the ceiling grid, or when they closed up the ceiling grid, no one documented where anything was. So again, that's the challenge that I hear. And the other thing too is that photo in the bottom right-hand corner there. The panels have been updated. Panels in many cases are assets in organizations as well, and they're not updated. So the expectation that your team is able to respond quickly and understand what's really out in the field is underscored by all of this. It's a combination. It's not one singular thing. It's that combination. And I attribute that to the lack of success of the team in many cases. They're almost set up to fail. And that time, and you said that multiple times, that word time is not in their favor. They're running around, they're trying to figure out stuff. And a lot of organizations are really trying to get their heads around what it is. And if you don't mind, you'll go ahead and advance to the next slide, Andy.
Yeah, before I do that, let me just piggyback on one thing you just talked about, decommission. 2 years ago, I worked with an organization. They had 700, this is true, 714 active PMs on equipment that was no longer in the facility. But on the positive side, they had 100% PM compliance on that equipment that was no longer there. So.
Well, that's a plus, right?
Yeah.
So here's part of the challenge too. Go ahead and advance it one more time. This is part of the challenge too, is you don't know what you don't know. And when I say that is how is your kind of look in the mirror and ask yourself, how are we documenting the stuff that is out in the field? And then how often are we revisiting that? If you've got 100 projects, I've got some of my clients actually that have 100+ projects across all of their different campuses. When I hear projects, something moved or something was added or something was replaced. What's the process for even documenting that? I don't know. It's different organizations do their own thing. The challenge is many don't have anything. And what happens is it becomes that snowball year over year. More stuff changes, more stuff isn't documented. But I'm a proponent of document it now. You're sitting in front of the thing, document it. And you have to ask, do you have tools that can do that? I don't know. But really take a look in the mirror and identify gaps in your current processes. If you don't have a way to document that, you need to look for tools that will allow you to do that. And again, when I say document it, I'm not talking about just putting a red Sharpie on a printed plan someplace and it gets tucked away. No, I'm talking about I'm in the field, I pull my phone out of my pocket and having a method to be able to do that and document what is it, where is it, and also set those PM schedules. The challenge that a lot of folks run into as well, and you touched on this, Andy, is how do you set up a PM schedule for something you don't even know exists? And it's a challenge, let alone the ones that you said, the 700 plus pieces of equipment that aren't in the field anymore that still have a PM schedule. But again, it's a challenge. Go ahead and go to the next one.
David,
Yeah.
organizations do a great job of adding things, lousy job updating and removing things. So,
Always, every single time, right? And I'm a firm believer of this too. Guys for the longest time were tied to that chair, tied to that
mhm,
desk. The only way I could
mhm.
update stuff is go back to the desk. I've got that little notebook tucked away in my shirt pocket, and that's where I write stuff down. And then I have to remember to read my own chicken scratching when I get back there because I'm in a hurry because I'm bouncing between job and job and job,
Yep,
across the campus.
yep.
And you know how it goes, Andy. You sit back down at that desk, and I'm like, okay, what did I remember? What did I write down there? Or I didn't have even enough space on that page. And you know what? It never gets fully updated. And the thing I always say is it never helps the next man up. The next person that has to go out there and fix that thing. The counter to that is everybody on your team has a smartphone in their pocket. If they don't, I would be shocked. There's a handful
Mhm,
I've seen still that got the little flip phones. But at the end of the day, teams are getting smarter. The buildings are getting smarter. So, not all the buildings are from 1910. And I've gone into buildings that were older than that. And it's a mess, but even sections of those buildings are being brought up using modern stuff, meaning they got newer equipment. And it's that hybrid model of I've got old and new. It's the mix of this and that. The challenge is, though, you still got to document what's out there so you can maintain that stuff.
mhm.
So if you don't
I
mind, go
know.
to the next slide, Dandy.
Well, more people will be spending time in their office, particularly now because it's March Madness and basketball starts tomorrow. So, yes.
It's very true. Very true. And the end of the day, too, everybody's trying to figure out how AI is going to help me. I've done multiple presentations on this, and there's a fear factor, to be frank. I mean, in
Hmm.
many teams, they think it's going to take my job, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And I try to calm them by saying, listen, AI is not going to go up on that roof. It's not going to replace that unit. It's not going to fix that unit. It may be more predictive, and say, hey, there's something going sideways.
Hmm.
Even your energy consumption is going up on this unit. It's not running efficiently. That's the predictors that I feel that AI is really going to help, as well as those long-term budgeting metrics. It's going to give you some of that screenshot or more exposure to that type of stuff. But you're still going to have a guy or gal go up on the roof and fix that thing. Have to replace the filters. They're going to have to do the PMs on that equipment. There's still going to be a body that does that, and that's going to be in high demand. Okay, but also people are getting smarter. Your team is getting smarter. I've walked into departments and we've had accounts for 10 years in some instances, and I'll go in there with the guy that used to have the flip phone. Now he's got the smartphone, and he's in there on his smartphone more than even the younger guy that's in there because he didn't he's you could see it click in the guy's head. This is a tool, just like a wrench. This is a tool in my toolbox, and it helps them.
Hmm.
So, you mind go to the next slide?
I'm seeing AI being used to predict assets' health and therefore
Yeah,
life expectancy of that equipment. So now organizations are in a better position now to start budgeting for those future high ticket
100%.
items coming, right? Whether that's 1, 3, 5, 10 years or whatever the case may be, which helps
Yeah.
organizations budget much more effectively and efficiently.
100%. And it's interesting too because I feel like it's going to help them with that long-term predictive maintenance, but also the replacement dates, your end of life dates on equipment. Obviously, you're doing PMs to extend the useful life of the equipment. I mean,
Mhm.
maintain it, keep it optimized, running efficiently. I get all of that, but it's also going to be able to take note of things that are starting to happen and maybe even triggers. That could be sensors, that could be any number of different things that it's going to be able to pull that data
Mhm.
more frequently. And it's going to be running in the background all the time, 24/7. So it's going to be monitoring and things like that. But I also look at AI this way is it's going to help you and the team, I should say, with suggestions, for lack of a better term. It's going to say, and you were 100% spot on when it comes to that time back and forth from the field to go do their job, going to the parts room, going, sitting down at a computer ordering stuff, walking back and forth, jumping in the golf cart, going across campus, whatever the case may be. AI is going to start to say, listen, you've got a work order on that unit. Okay. Hey, it uses filters, this filter here uses these belts, or you know what? We had a problem with bearings on this thing before, or you know what? We've gone out and replaced that. We've checked that motor 5 times in the last year. Maybe it's time that you start looking. Matter of fact, here's a video that I just saw posted that someone else is running into the same thing, or maybe there was a recall on this unit. That's the stuff that AI is going to start making suggestions based off of your team's activities too. It's going to start to predict some of those things to really help the team, not have to go up on that roof or climb up that ladder, pop that roof hatch, and climb out on the roof, not only to do that, but also to then turn around and say, oh, shoot, you know what? It uses this belt, or it uses these filters, whatever the case may be. Or go jump in my car and run all the way over there. At least I'll have an idea of what the stuff is I need to take before I even go out there. And
Mhm.
that's where I really think, again, it's that ability to update things. It's going to help you reduce some of that risk too. Like you said at the very beginning too, stuff doesn't break on your clock. It breaks when it breaks, and the risk of things breaking, whether it's in the manufacturing world, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in education, it impacts your organization. And these are some of the things that are going to help reduce that risk and minimize that downtime. And again, it really comes down to I want to access the stuff when I need it, where I need it, and when I need it. That's what it comes down to, and it's not on their clock. It's on the clock of when the thing breaks.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
You know, um, look, I'm in the later part of my life, but and technology is moving way beyond, my knowledge. Okay. But last year I visited a site that just blew me away because the technician went out into the field with a tablet, looked at the equipment, brought up the PM, brought up the work order, okay, had a three-dimensional PDF file in there where they could click on it, rotate it, break it apart. These are the parts that are going to take it to replace this. It was actually a pump to replace the pump and whatever had to be done. Click, 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 add to cart, all the spare part, all the parts that he needed. It was like add to cart, add two of these,
Yep.
add to this. Hit send. That went to the storeroom. The storeroom had a pick list that was printed out of those items. Someone in the storeroom picked those 3 or 4 items out. They actually delivered those parts with a drone to the field
Yeah.
as the technician was preparing the job site.
Yeah.
That just
I've
blew me
got
away.
I've got a couple of clients that are similar. They're using drones all over their campus, and it's exactly what you said. Before the guy even climbs off the roof, he's hit the submit button, and it goes to the parts guy who's loading it up into these little drones that take it to the building, so it's in the lobby by the time he gets off the roof.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm a little ashamed because I just upgraded to Windows 95. So technology is just whipping by me.
Oh,
All
shame,
right.
shame.
Let me show everybody exactly what I'm talking about as far as, our inefficiencies and the costs of the organizations. This is a spreadsheet that I created when I was a plant manager 20 years ago. more than actually, golly, more than that. Um, my maintenance manager came to me and said, Andy, we need to hire two more technicians. And I said no. And the reason I said no is because they came to me with an emotional request. All right. I couldn't go to the owners of the company and say, hey, I'm adding two more headcount because that dips into my bucket, that bucket being profits. Okay. So this is completely different than I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to actually bring up the spreadsheet for you. If you want if you want this spreadsheet, okay, um, I will be more than happy to send it to you. All you need is just send your your contact information, and I will send it to you. This is the number one item that I've shared with no exaggeration. I've shared this document probably 1,000 times. Okay, but I want you to look at this because no organization looks at the true cost the way that this spreadsheet will show you in our inefficiencies. Now, one thing before I get into this, I want you to understand these are not my numbers. This is the client's numbers. All right. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but just to show you, they had 22 folks in the maintenance department. Their average hourly rate was $62.32. If you take 22 people times 2,080, which is a full work year, um, that gives them their capacity of 45,760 hours. They worked an additional 8,200 hours of overtime. If I add in their supporting staff, their supervisors, managers, and storeroom or parts room clerks into their salaries, their total payroll for this group right here went from $62. Now, this is fully burdened. It went from $62.32 closer now to $80 an hour. All right. If I add in all this expenses and salaries, they average their average PTO, personal time off or holiday or vacation, whatever you want to say, they average 3 weeks. So that's 15 days. Those hours come out of my bucket of capacity. They also had 4% absenteeism. So those 1,800 hours comes out of my capacity. So if I do the math by reducing those hours, my average hourly rate now goes from $62 up to $80. Now it's up to almost $90 an hour. That $90 an hour is being paid out of this thing called profits. That's the hourly rate. That's $90 an hour times 22 times 52 weeks. So it's not the $62. The bottom section is here is what I want to show you. I mentioned earlier the international utilization of a technician is between 17 and 24%. That's where this numbers come from. So here's all the things that chip away at our capacity. All right. Personal time, they have lunch. This is an 8 hour shift. 15 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes for lunch, 15 minutes in the afternoon. That's 1 hour out of that 8 hours. Those 5,700 hours comes out of my bucket. They they average 90 minutes a day of non-authorized breaks. Non-authorized breaks, smoke breaks, going to the restroom, not doing hanging out. All right. But that's an hour and a half. Those hours come out. Planning, all right, and instruction. They were doing they were given their job assignments and then they were trying to figure out how to do it. So they average an hour a day. Looking for parts and tools. I already mentioned that. An hour a day. The other things contributing to that, right? And then travel time, right? All these minutes translate into hours. So in this example right here, their utilization was 13%. Their direct labor, we call it time on tools, was down to 10 and a half, 11%. So if you go back up to the top here, my capacity started out at 45,000 hours plus the 8,000. So I'm now up to 54,000 hours capacity. When the dust finally settles, they were actually only working 5,540 hours, costing the organization $664 an hour times 22 times 52 weeks. That's incredibly expensive. Again, I'm not saying we have bad people working. It's the system that allows that to happen. So by us functioning at 13%, That's the equivalent of 17 of the 22 people sitting in the break room or the cafeteria all day long, while the other 5 people do all the work. Now, all we have to do is do some slight little changes. Let me shrink this down a little bit so you can see it, the impact. I can't do anything about lunch. What I can do though is I can make sure that my estimated hours to do that repair are more accurate. I'm going to give you 1 more hour of work, assigned work. I'll still give you 30 minutes, all right, of non-authorized breaks. Watch these numbers in the yellow, but particularly look at my average hourly rate. That goes to 30 minutes. I've doubled my utilization. I just knocked $300 an hour off by just adding 1 more hour of work into our schedules. Planning and scheduling. What if I take some of those people and just move them around and I actually take one of those and actually make a maintenance planner out of one of them or 2 of them? So therefore the technicians don't have to plan their own jobs. And by the way, I got 22 people that can do it 23 different ways on how to do that repair because one of them's an engineer, right? So take that away. Now I'm tripled my utilization. I'm now gone from $600 an hour to $200 an hour. And now let's just say, okay, for all my planned work, let's start saying, okay, let's take one of those storeroom people and start kitting their planned work. So therefore, the technicians who tend to be paid at a higher hourly rate than my warehouse clerks, take that away. I've went from $600 an hour to $162. I haven't hired anybody, but I picked up the equivalent of what? 9 more people. All right. I haven't hired anybody. All I did was just I made some changes, fundamental changes, okay? And I just moved some people around. There are very few organizations in the world that truly look at the efficiency and the cost of that efficiency to our organization because that money comes, those salaries get paid out of our budgets or get paid out of our profits. So again, if you want this spreadsheet, just email us. I'll be more than happy to send it to you. And you could run your own numbers. Okay. All right. So let's close that and get back to there. Get back into here. So let's wrap this up. Nope, I'm sorry, that's not what I want. That's not what I want. I want to get back into the PowerPoint. Here, here, here. Okay, so what are some of the things that we can do? All right, some of the quick wins, if you will. I'm going to start with my asset hierarchy. Okay. We got to know what we got. All right. Asset registry, hierarchy, equipment bill of materials. The equipment bill of materials, that'll determine what you actually need in your storeroom to have the right parts at the right time. Use failure history in your current maintenance strategies. Conduct perhaps a FMEA workshop, maybe a reliability centered maintenance workshop to truly understand how does failure manifest itself and how are we going to address it? What strategy do we put in place to address those failures? Conduct process mapping to lean out the processes, right? So some people call it brown paper, white paper, current state, future state, okay? Assign for those familiar with RACI charts, that's who's responsible for this task. And if that person doesn't do it, who are we going to hold accountable? And then once we develop the RACI chart, let's define exactly what do you do when you achieve this task or when you get to this task. By doing these 3 things, that eliminates the gray area, or worse yet, if you want to push my button, say that's not my job. Okay? Clearly, well-defined processes, who's responsible, and then exactly what do you do. So when you do this, I'm now going to take that 30 percenters that I talked about earlier, and now I'm going to automatically, or at least rapidly, elevate them up to the 30% because we are going to be consistently doing the same job the exact same way over and over and over again. Have a robust spare parts management system. Okay. And then implement changes and monitor, implement some of these changes. And then what is the right KPI to monitor the changes that we've implemented and are they achieving the desired results? Because if they're not, timeout, What we're doing just ain't working. Okay. Last slide before we open it up for Q&A. Look, if we start doing the right things, the numbers are going to take care of it. There's too many organizations that David and I have worked with over the years that chase numbers. Okay. Because I can tell you right now what number you want. I'll give you the number. In my maintenance budget, if I've hit my maintenance budget in October, I'll hit that number. I'll just stop fixing equipment in November, December. Okay. I'll hit my budget. But if we start doing the right things that we've talked about, right, in this session, repair expenses increase by on average up to 30%. And that goes back to what I've said and what David has said is we need to bring our assets back up to some level of health because we've abused them for so long. Now, but look what happens when we achieve that. Expenses. Remember I said a third of maintenance expenses are wasted dollars. They decline 50 to 70% over the next 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. Your machine breakdown declines 40 to 50%. The metric we use there is mean time between failures. Machinery downtime declines 40 to 60%. The metric there is mean time to repair. If I have the right job plans, if I have the right equipment, if I know where that equipment is, if I have the right parts, okay? Spare parts inventory, because we are not so reactive now, all right? My inventory levels actually start decreasing, and therefore my inventory dollars actually come back down, which would make our friends in finance happier. And then our productivity increases because we're doing the right things, because we have the right strategies, because we have the right equipment, the asset registry, the asset hierarchy. Okay, our productivity, right? And I just showed that to you, increases 20 to 30%. So don't chase numbers. Just start doing the right things. Okay.